Now, if you're not familiar with extra credits, I would highly encourage you to check them out, especially if you're into game design, game development, or the games industry as a whole, because that is what they cover. And today, we're going to be looking at a video that specifically covers board games and board game distributors, which is very relevant to me specifically. And I apologize if this is something you already know, but for those of you that might be newer to the channel, I actually used to work as a board game buyer for a board game store in California. And I actually worked with a lot of representatives from the companies you see behind me. So I'm very intrigued about what this video is going to be about, and I wanted to cover it with you on the channel. So without further ado, let's go ahead and watch the episode. All right, extra credit, let's hear what you have to say.
Have you ever accidentally stepped on a board game piece?
Oh my God,
especially
yes.
one of those really pointy
Yes, I have.
ones like a Monopoly hotel or a miniature holding a sword.
Not a Monopoly
well,
hotel, but a
that
miniature
same
with
surprise
a sword, yes.
and
I
pain
think it was technically
seems
a
to
dagger.
be hitting physical game publishers around the globe these days. Thanks for
Genuinely not surprised by that.
Seriously though, as
That's
much
been
as the
happening
tariffs
for
are to
years, I feel
blame
like.
this time around, it does seem like every few years we hear about a different problem that rocks the world of board games
Completely.
and tabletop RPGs.
Yes, that is
which
100%
got us
true.
thinking,
I've covered
if
it on
someone
this
were to
channel.
make a new game, right now, how in our current world would that work?
This is an interesting question because honestly, like my immediate guess, and I assume he has an answer to this or at least is going to discuss it further as we get into this video, but I just want to pause for a second and like give my 2 cents on how I think it happens these days. Most of the time, I don't know what happens when it comes to like the big publishing companies who do end up going through distributors, but I know, even those big companies actually, now that I think about it, go through fan funding. Like it's either through Kickstarter or GameFound or something like that. So many board games seem like their development and the costs all get sunk into, or get covered rather, I guess, by that process. So I'm curious if he's gonna like talk about that, where this is gonna go. Let's just keep watching it. I'm already immensely intrigued about where this is going. And we're like,
why are these
33
games
seconds in.
and the companies that make them so susceptible to these kinds of intense market forces? Well, good news, everyone. Our buddy, board game and tabletop RPG designer Eddie Webb, has agreed to break it all down for us.
Oh,
as
excellent.
soon as he's done screaming into that pillow. It's okay, Eddie. Take your time.
Oh, I do appreciate their humor on this channel so much.
Seriously, I can relate to your pain because we are currently kickstarting our new Extra History 2026 calendar. We're doing it again after last year's success with new art, new historical surprises, and as much of a tariff plan in place as possible. But more on this
Good luck,
beauty
guys.
after the episode. 3 years ago, Eddie told us about how the pandemic was killing board game companies. You can find that episode right here. But these days, we're hearing the same thing about the Trump administration's pandemic-sized, ever-changing tariffs. Eddie's been working on physical games for nearly 25 years, so he's close to the problem right now.
It is true.
And shockingly, he says the overall big issue is modern capitalism. Though we did want to break that down a little more, because that seems to be...
I can't disagree with them. I do think the crux of the problem does come down to modern capitalism, but as he said, he's going to break it down more, so let's listen to that.
The catch-all these days. Specifically, this goes back to consolidation. In 1998, two of the biggest game distributors in the United States merged to form Alliance Game Distributors, and they handle the lion's share of tabletop game distribution within the...
That is true. Alliance was massive. I actually have a connection to some of the OG founders of Alliance Game Distributors. Like they're not involved with the company anymore, but it was definitely back when they were like when it was Chessex and everything. So, Chessex is still around technically too. Like they're not completely gone. They just did form Alliance, and then I think Chessex broke back off. I don't know the full history of it, but if you have... I guarantee you there is a very high likelihood, especially if you've been playing board games or specifically RPGs since something like the 90s and possibly even the 80s, you have probably rolled Chessex dice. It is inevitable if you're in board game development or just playing games, really. Not even in board game development, just like playing games, you've probably rolled Chessex dice.
The US. Alliance was, in turn, bought by comic distribution giant Diamond, which held a virtual monopoly over comic distribution and wanted to extend that to tabletop games.
I had known that Alliance had started carrying Diamond comics because I was still working at the board game store as their buyer when that happened. I just hadn't realized that that had happened 100% because they had been bought. I wonder how long of a process that was if they started carrying them. I'm gonna have to look more into that. That's very
Then
intriguing.
COVID started, DC and Marvel pulled out of Diamond. And in January 2025, Diamond filed for bankruptcy, which included the entire Alliance game
I do remember their
catalog.
bankruptcy.
Now, the drama
claim.
around the
that
Diamond
explains
bankruptcy
so much
is
more.
just so juicy and fascinating. And I wish we had time to get into it right now.
I wish you had time to
you know
get
what?
into it
I
too.
can't leave this on the table. I'm just going to tell you all about it real quick as a treat. And I mean like super quick. Going to channel my inner micro
Yes,
machine
do it.
Here we go. Diamond went into bankruptcy auction, and the winning bid went to a different company also called Alliance Entertainment specifically. But the debtors declared they had chosen a backup bid from Universal Distribution and Ad Populum instead. But Alliance claimed they won the bid, so they went back to the bankruptcy court and were awarded the right to the winning bid. But then Alliance terminated that bid and sued Diamond for fraud, claiming they misrepresented themselves, so the bid went back to Universal and Ad Populum. But now it turns out the reason Alliance wanted Diamond in the first place is because of their Wizards of the Coast distribution deal. But Hasbro told Diamond they were ending their distribution deal with Alliance when the contract ran out in April. But
I remember that.
I promised Diamond never mentioned it in the bankruptcy proceedings, and Hasbro never mentioned their intent until after Alliance sued for the winning bid, and now Universal and Ad Populum own Diamond. And in the midst of all that, Penguin Random House pulled most of their comics distribution out of Diamond, except maybe not in the UK. And oh my God, it is such a mess, folks. Whew.
Holy cow. Okay, I had heard snippets of this back. I mean, this has been going on for years. I have not worked at the board game store in like 4 or 5 years now, I think it is. It's been a while. It feels like it's been an extremely long time. This was happening while I was there. I cannot believe this is still going on. I mean, I can, I guess. I absolutely can't. Oh. Let's keep watching this. This is a fascinating. I'm so glad we're watching this, you guys.
The point is that the distribution chain was in trouble before the tariffs were even a concern.
Absolutely
because
true.
so much of tabletop game distribution in the US had been consolidated into one company. That is our first point of fragility. And what's the second point, you ask? Hyper specialization. Of course, this isn't exclusive to.
I'm pausing one more time really fast because hyper specialization is exactly one of the same problems that I think is affecting Warhammer and GW as well. And it's happening in every sector of entertainment that we enjoy and consume on a regular basis. Games, movies, television, etc. Like, I just feel like this problem is getting worse and worse. And I don't know what to do about it, frankly. Let's keep watching.
Games, and it's due to how production chains have evolved over time. Over the past several decades, the world has pushed countries into being highly specialized as part of a global manufacturing economy. All the pieces of an iPhone, for example, aren't just made in China. Various parts are also made in South Korea, Japan, India, and even the US. Similarly, board games often require manufacturing pieces in different parts of the world before they're put together and packaged at a distributor, like Alliance, and sent off to retailers. As a side note, books for TTRPGs aren't immune to this either. Eddie told us a story of how one project he worked on required the interior pages to be made at one printer, the slipcase at a second, and all the parts were shipped to a...
What? That's crazy. I didn't know RPGs suffer this problem. I knew board games suffer the problem of being piecemealed together and then actually assembled at the distributors. I didn't realize that even the RPG books did that. I wonder if this is like something that Indie Press Comics or Indie Press Revolution runs into, because they do a lot of indie publishing.
Third printer
and Pugmire,
who made
I
the
know,
covers and assembled the
used to be
final
published
book.
by them.
Now
I think
multiply
it's
that
bigger
by
now.
how many parts board games can have. Actually, let's use a hypothetical to illustrate this. If we at Extra Credits wanted to make, say, a board game out of our longtime apocryphal franchise Hecknomancer, how would this hyper-specialization fragility affect us? Well, since it is, of course, a big, and again, hypothetical, epic fantasy campaign, we're gonna need tons of stuff. Like some nice cardstock boards, player mats, well-made cards in a separate little card box, and some of those plastic miniatures that look super cool and that I will totally paint one day. I swear, do not look at the pile of shame behind me. We also...
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. First of all...
want it to go into...
Hold on.
Super cool, and that I will totally paint one day. I swear, do...
Okay. I would print these and paint these. Are you kidding me? I love these miniatures. Also, it's good to know that they also have a pile of shame, just like I do. Yes, we all will paint our piles of shame one day in its entirety. Of course. Yes, absolutely.
Do
Continue the
not
video.
look at the pile of shame behind me. We also want it to go into a lot of stores, so we need to focus on manufacturers that will work in large quantities. Well, cards usually are made by specialized card manufacturers, so let's say we found one in Germany. China is our go-to place for boards and boxes, so we'll get those made there. Finally, neither of them handle plastic. So for dice, deluxe counters, and those sweet, sweet plastic minis that I am in no way addicted to, we have to
We're
go
all
with
addicted
a
to it. It's
different
fine, admit it.
Chinese
Just
printer.
everybody admit it,
Ideally,
okay? We're
this
addicted
heavy
to miniatures. We
specialization
love them.
would actually reduce the fragility of production. Like if you can't get your plastic meeples made at one Chinese printer, maybe you could get wooden ones made in Poland while the rest of your game components get produced. But over time, this evolved into companies manufacturing only what was needed when it was needed, instead of stockpiling in case of failure. When it all works well, these so-called, quote, just-in-time supply chains are great. Less warehouse costs for the manufacturer and supplier, and less need to pay in bulk for the purchaser, which means less of your company's money tied up in stock. However, it doesn't take much to break such a chain.
And the fact that less of the company's money is tied up in stock in ways that the executives can't use it or benefit from it, it's probably one of the key factors here in why this is continuing to shatter like he's showing. Gosh,
and cause all kinds of manufacturing problems.
Excellent video.
The UK actually learned this since Brexit, particularly with medications and water treatment chemicals. Both became too expensive if they were shipped across the UK border, so in the case of medication, it has led to certain things like wart removal no longer being covered by the National Health Service, and in the case of water treatment chemicals, that led to water companies dumping sewage rather than paying for treatment because the fines for dumping are less than the costs of treating the water. Ew.
Ew, indeed. I had not heard that specifically. Oh my gosh, that's gross.
I really hope you're not making tea with that sewage water across the pond, though I do appreciate how much of it you are spilling right now. And all these new tariffs could lead to similar consequences.
Gross.
A tariff might get added to a product crossing a country's border, which must be paid by the company who purchased the manufacture of the product, not by the company that made it. However, it also might be added to a part of a product if it's being shipped somewhere to be assembled.
That sounds
so
annoying.
if
Just a part
Technomancer
of
the
it?
board game was hypothetically assembled and distributed by, say, Alliance, all of the parts would have to be shipped to the United States. And since the US has tariffs against China and Germany, each part would have a separate tariff added to it. These little charges can add up quickly, and that cost will be passed on to the consumer, no matter how much the executive branch tries to bully retailers. And that is because of the third point of fragility. The margins for these games are extremely small,
and they always
because not
have been.
all of the money made from a game goes to the game's publisher. There's a bit of standard wisdom in tabletop games, that you multiply the costs of making something to find your actual retail cost. That number can vary. Some people say 5 times, others 8, and even more people go higher. But the reason is that the money has to be spread around. Once a game is printed, all of those units are then sold to the distributor. Of course, the distributor wants to buy those at a price that's low enough where they'll make a profit, but the publisher wants to make as much cash as they can. Then retailers buy the units from the distributor, and the same dance is done once more. The retailer wants to make that cost as low as possible, while the distributor wants it as high as possible. And then third verse, same as the first, the retailer then sells it to the consumer at the final retail price, which is hopefully high enough to give the retailer some profit, but low enough to be attractive for a customer to, actually buy. Let's use another hypothetical.
Unfortunately, that is absolutely 100% true. And if you've ever gone into your friendly local board game store and been like, man, board games are really expensive sometimes, or I can't believe the cost of this, and then you go online and you see that it's equally as high and everything, that's why. It's because it constantly is going through this like, okay, well, somebody sold it here, then it gets sold here, and then it gets sold here, and it's just cost after cost after cost, and it's crazy how quickly it can build up.
Hypothetical example from our increasingly hypothetical game. I promise you all we are not making this thing. I do not want to get your hopes up. Please believe me when I say that. Assume for the moment we can sell Technomancer the board game for, let's say, $50. At a
That would be
$50
insane.
price point, our
With
distributor will
miniatures?
purchase the game from us for, say, $20 a unit. So, our goal is to have our manufacturing costs, making all of the parts of the game and shipping them out to our distributor, be $10 a unit or under, which would give us enough money to recoup all of our development costs, which include paying the people who made the thing: writers, artists, editors, graphic designers, producers, you know the drill. And in this hypothetical, we luck out. Even though US printers are quoting it around $18 a unit to print and ship it, we find a Chinese printer that can get it done for $8 a unit. Cha-ching! So this all looks doable, right? We'll get everything made for the $20 our distributor will pay us, and then they'll probably sell Hecknomancer to retailers for something around $30, so they make around $10 a unit, and then the retailer will put it in their stores and try to sell it, making about $20 a unit. Everybody gets paid. But now tariffs enter the picture. Yeah. Dun dun dun! A 10% tariff on that would bump our costs to $8.80, which means we won't make as much money, but we can also probably absorb it because we're still under that $10 per unit safety threshold that we set before. Though a 50% tariff means we're at $12 a unit, and now we're losing money unless we can get distribution and retail to adjust their prices as well and make less money along the way, which probably isn't going to happen. But then if the tariffs keep fluctuating randomly, which is sadly not a hypothetical, something like a 110% tariff means that the physical part of our board games now cost $16.80 a unit, which means we are losing nearly $7 per game. You multiply that by hundreds of thousands of units, and that is a lot of cash burned and a lot of small businesses.
He's not wrong. It's gonna be a lot of small businesses crushed. Like, gosh, I'm so glad we watched this, but I'm also very sad about this because it's so true, and I was worried. I've been worried for a long time about board games, where they're gonna be at, what's going to happen to them, and now I'm even more worried because
crippled.
I don't know what's going to keep happening with
tariffs. Some people might be asking, why not just increase the price? Well, that's because of the last point of fragility, which is we as consumers are really resistant to game prices increasing. If you want an example of this, just check out one of the gazillion YouTube videos talking about the price point for Switch 2 games. Yes, video games and tabletop games are apples to oranges, and there are many other factors why in that specific example people are pissed, but it still is a good illustration of the overall point. We as consumers do not like it when our entertainment costs go up. I know I don't. To use a less hypothetical example, let's talk about Eddie's Realm of Pugmire TTRPG rulebook. As of the time of this video's publication, he's selling it for $60 USD. That is for a full-color, 224-page book with lots of art. For some contrast, the Art of World of Warcraft book, which was published nearly 10 years ago, sells for around $100. And college textbooks of a similar size can go for $150 or even higher. And yet, even a couple of years ago, the average price of a hardcover tabletop RPG was closer to $50 because it is hard.
I was gonna say, I didn't realize Pugmire had gone up that high, because I believe I remember getting Pugmire and being able to sell it in the board game store I worked at for, I think it was about $50. It might have been like 45 at one point. I don't really remember specifically. But it was definitely below 50, so the fact that it's gone up to $60, or like maybe it was at 50, but regardless, the fact that it's gone up to $60 is unfortunate. Like, I completely understand where these costs are coming from, but it is unfortunate.
To convince people to pay more for a thing they've bought in the past. It also, of course, doesn't help that the prices of everything else is also going up. There's plenty of videos on why that is, but that means that most folks don't have as much to spend on entertainment as they once did, meaning right now there's a ton of validity for not liking price increases in your entertainment. And currently there's really not a good answer to this problem. That's what makes all of this so scary. Things have shifted to either the price going up astronomically, or the publishers taking staggering losses, or both. It's no exaggeration to say that some companies are looking to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, with a couple citing potential losses of over $1 million, like Cephalofair, the people who make the Gloomhaven games. And some companies have already shut down because this was just one economic push too many.
Many or not.
In truth, to solve this, a lot of how games are made, distributed, and sold has to change on a fundamental level. That change, of course, will not come quickly, and it's far more complicated than simply saying print in the US instead. Heck, even if there was a multi-year plan to relocate more production within the US, and let's be real, the current administration doesn't even have a concept of a plan on that front, this would be a staggeringly complex process that still might result in elevated prices when all is said and done, because corporations are going to corporation, in addition to it being crippling to publishers and consumers in the short term. So for now, the advice we gave back in 2022 holds true today. If you love games, and you are financially able to, pre-ordering or backing a crowdfunder campaign is a huge help to show publishers they still have an audience and to give them an infusion of much-needed capital up front to help offset the rising costs. Also, you can and should write your congressional representative about the damage this tariff roller coaster is doing. Actually, some states have already sued the US government over them, specifically Oregon, Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Minnesota, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, and Vermont. Just wanted to give them all a shout out. Also, using a website like fivecalls.org has made it easier than ever to help you get set up and add your voices behind lawsuits like these that could help the industry. Because truly, as gamers who love board games and tabletop RPGs, we really do have to stick together on this. We all love games. And now really isn't the time to tear publishers down or claim they're being greedy. A lot of this is out of all of our collective hands, and we're all frustrated. So there is no time like the present to make your voice heard. Then afterward, you could reward yourself by, I don't know, kicking back and pretending to play Hecknomancer, the most anticipated board game that I cannot stress enough will never come out.
Now that we've concluded the episode, I just want to come back in and give my final thoughts on the topic of this video. Board games are in a rough spot. They have and will probably continue to go through rough spots over and over again. Just like they said, it's about like, I don't know, every 3 to 4 years, or I feel like something crazy hits the board game industry and people get worried about it. But I'm honestly optimistic that despite everything, despite the tariffs, despite these problems, despite the specialization, despite all the fragilities that they talked about in this episode, that inevitably board games will survive. I just don't know if they're going to be in the same state that they were back during the boom of board games. I don't know if we'll see that again. I really hope that we do. Again, I'm going to probably remain pretty optimistic that that will continue to happen, but genuinely, it is something that I do worry about and that I try to pay attention to. So I'm really, honestly, very glad that we were able to watch this together. I hope that you enjoyed getting to see a little bit of coverage about board games in this way. And honestly, I'd love to know your thoughts down below. Have you also noticed the constant increasing of board game prices, and has it turned you off from purchasing things? Do you only ever do crowdfunded games because that seems the only reliable way to get things? Let me know. Let's have a discussion about it down in the comments below. I'm going to go ahead and head off now. Thank you all so much for watching, and have an especially wonderful hobby night, everybody.